Welcome to True Parent for Life. I'm your host, Christina Vera.
And I'm your co-host, Maylin Sambois.
Welcome back for our next episode. We're really excited. As you know, we are very intentional about bringing guest experts, whether it be in business, lifestyle, leadership. And today's episode will be nothing short of that. We have our guest co-host with us, Miss Elizabeth Martinez, who you will get to hear from in just a moment. Elizabeth is not only a superstar here in Central Ohio and beyond. I've known Elizabeth, I want to say almost, at least 13 years. Feels like it's at least 13 years. She is presently president and chief executive officer for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Central Ohio. She has gone on to create so many different organizations, capacities for other organizations and community partners. She has served in leadership roles within the Columbus, really Central Ohio region for an extended period of time, whether it be on the Commission of Hispanic and Latino Affairs. You've also done a lot of work in education, a lot of work around mentoring, around youth, over 18 years of experience working with children, youth, and families. I mean, literally your bio is like,
it's amazing.
It's amazing.
It's #goals.
#goals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've been honored in so many different capacities, whether it be Columbus Business First C-Suite Awards. You've been named among the top national Latino leaders by the National Diversity Council, as well as Women of the Year from the Ohio Diversity Council. You were most recently named the 2021 CEO of the Year in the small nonprofit category by Columbus CEO magazine.
I mean,
wow.
I think the directive was don't read the bio. That's what we had agreed upon.
Yes, and we haven't even read it, guys. We didn't even read it.
And honestly, there's so much more. But I think there's power in being able to really when you can see your life's work and I feel like it's still even in a small capsule, because you have done so many things and have impacted so many lives in so many ways that leaders and organizations think and function and really think about the space of service, that I feel like things like that you have to highlight.
Yes.
Because it's not only important, but it's also inspiring. You think about young leaders and young girls who, oftentimes you never really see yourself in these spaces, in these rooms. And then so when you come across people who either look like you or come from your background or, have been able to achieve so much, it's like, wow, if she did it, I could do it. And so we are honored to have you here today with us. And just, Elizabeth, if you don't mind sharing, I know I kind of gave a quick overview of just what you've been up to, but how did you end up in this path of leadership and service for so many years?
Yeah.
Where did it start?
First of all, you both are incredibly kind. I'm so privileged to be here. A couple of things that I want to share. We're at the top of a new year. If there's anything the past 33 months have, I think, underscored for all of us is the importance of pausing, recognizing the power of connection, relationships, people that are not only doing meaningful work in the community, but are meaningful in interactions with you. So I wanted to start off with giving public flowers to you for your work. I think anybody who shows up as youth advocates, as individuals who are just part of building community fabric, are people that I love dearly. So congratulations to the both of you for the work that you have done. And I'm grateful to be here. It's a good day. Good day. But I will share a little bit of my background. I'll probably start by sharing that I'm a native of the island of Puerto Rico, for people that are not familiar with that. Although I had a significant number of early years in my childhood where I lived on the East Coast. I spent a lot of time kind of growing up between Bronx, New York. I lived in New Jersey for some time. I had a brief experience here in Columbus and Worthington, and I would probably summarize a lot of those experiences, because we did a lot of bouncing around when I was growing up as a child, as somewhat of traumatic experiences as a child. But what I will also say, it helped me develop some significant skills as we get a little bit further in the conversation of how do you land here. I think you have a kind of the gift now of time, perspective, and reflection to understand that all of those experiences create opportunities for you in the future that you don't even know that you're being set up for. I'm also very intentional about not wanting to glorify resilience and survival and trauma. I think it's important, but I think it's important for us to recognize that if we didn't have to go through those paths, that would be
okay
the
too.
ideal scenario, right?
Right.
And I'm not trying to sign up for all of that again, but appreciate that experience. I think is part of my background, I think is important is I'm a mom as well. I became a mom at a very young age to who is now an adult child, creative genius.
Yes.
He keeps me on my game for sure.
Yes.
But he's also been such a instrumental part of my growth learning journey, and kind of what motivated me to every day to wake up and want to just be a little bit better than I was the previous day, because I had someone who was watching me, and I was really aware of what that meant for our experience, especially since most of that experience was one between just he and I. I'm a daughter, I'm a sister. And so I would say that as I look forward kind of into the professional career, getting to where I am now, I've always spent my career in the youth development space. You talked about earlier, my time in with Big Brothers Big Sisters, which I have a milestone celebration. I've been with the organization this year will be 20 years.
Wow.
Which just I got started when I was about 12.
Of course.
It's
As an intern.
It's interesting to see how time goes by so quickly, but just such important work. But I have been always very invested in thinking about how could I take my gifts, skills, and talents and leverage them to do good. And it just happened to show up in spaces where young people were present. And I'm just so grateful for that.
I love that you said, you've been intentional about taking your skill sets and using that to serve. Do you feel like, was there a transitional point, because I feel like we go through phases in our journeys, whether it be personal or professional phases. So when you think about the younger version of you, just entering, whether it be, because you've been with Big Brothers and Big Sisters 20 years. So if you go back to that first year where you were like, you know what? I'm an adult now. I'm working in, I have my big grown-up job. At what point in that space did you start having that conversation in your mind as far as what do I want to do, and how do I want to show up every single day, whether it be for this particular employer? It's just I feel like all of us, everybody's journey is so different. And was there a pivotal point or a situation kind of in the beginning of that journey that shifted your mindset in where you said, I want to be able to use my skill sets to be able to help other people?
Yeah. I would say, to do a reflection now, it's easier. I think at the time I didn't necessarily understand the intention in my behavior. But as I reflect, I think a couple of things stand out, both in what I was really clear on in terms of the engagement that I had with the organization. I wanted to come in. I wanted to be part of this mission that, I knew very little about going in, but, quickly understood just the magnitude of impact that this organization was having, not only locally, but nationally. And I wanted to be a part of that. But I really went in with this notion of, I wanted to focus on developing my brand. I wanted to be thoughtful about what does it mean when I show up to a space, what are people expecting because I show up to the room? And then and also when I leave the room, what should have been the experience that people have had because I've been there, right? And that's bigger than just a job for me. That's more about kind of the life journey that I began. And, keep in mind, still kind of a younger parent and kind of navigating through experiences with my son. But I recognized that going into the organization, my role was about impact, but also adding value in the spaces where I was present. I know now as a leader that, leaders are problem solvers. And I characterize myself as a gap filler. If there's something to be done, if there's, whether it's part of my job description, and people can't see me with air quotes right now, but my job description or not, if there was a gap to fill and I had a skill set to fill it, then I was going to step in. And I think when you start to do that, especially early on in your career, because whatever level you are within an organization, you are solving problems. And to the extent that you have the capacity and the ability to solve problems on a higher level, that creates space and opportunity for you to be able to do that. I think that the last thing that I will say is that I also was very fortunate that as I started my time with the organization, I always had one foot in the organization and one foot in community. That's the genesis of my work with Big Brothers Big Sisters had a very strong emphasis on me being in community, which I think is important because I think that we intend to do great things through our organization. There's no perfect organization, but it also helps you take kind of the pulse and the temperature of what's happening in the community, right? I think the most dangerous thing that any organization could do is exclusively read the books that we author, right? Is we think we're doing the work, but we got to go back in community and check, the checks and balances. And what that afforded me the opportunity to do is to then be able to kind of bring back those experiences to the organization. And I was also fortunate to have so many people along the journey that were willing to step up, to mentor me, to support me. I had an amazing relationship with my predecessor who, very early on in my career with the organization was also intentional about how he could be supportive. And I think that's important.
I love that.
So I'm glad you mentioned mentors, right? Because I think with Femergy, as you've seen our work, we're very big about mentors. Who mentors you? You mentioned the previous, right, CEO, how he was kind of like mentoring you in a way. Did you realize early on the importance of mentorship, or is that something that you realized from? Because I know we do it with youth, but personally, sometimes we put it separate, right? Like, youth mentoring is great, but adult is a little more hard to see the value, I think, when we're a little older. Did you find the value of mentorship something like early on that you're like, this is something I need to do? Did you go after it yourself, or people just reach out to you? Because a lot of people have a hard time finding mentors, and how do they start that relationship? What was that journey for you in your career?
It's interesting because I haven't paused to think about the specific time when kind of I was awakened to the importance of that. But I consider myself to be a student. My goal, kind of destination in life is to leave here on empty. And that assumes that I have a whole lot of learning to do, a whole lot of growing to do. And I recognize that. But I think the mentorship part is because I've always been a student. I always show up to spaces with the understanding that I'm going to learn. But I also recognize that I can't leave my growth, my development in the hands of any member of any organization. So while, afforded some really unique experiences to be surrounded by people who are willing to pour into you, willing to support, is I sought that out. And I don't think just professionally. I think it's as important to do that in the personal space, right? And so, I think it's powerful I personally, have a very anchored position in my faith. And I think it's good for me to have a spiritual mentor, people that I go to that can kind of breathe into and feed into different spaces of my life. But I have been intentional of seeking that out. Maybe not as formal as probably as I have been in kind of the most recent years of my career. But yeah, I think that's incredibly powerful to understand that nobody arrives at any of the work that we do alone.
Yeah.
You need community. And it's, I think it's important to see people that are, that have done the work, that wherever you're aspiring to go, whatever that next level is, that you can surround yourself by those individuals for exposure. I think that growth can happen vertically, and it happens on both sides. It reinforces and convicts you on the things that you're really clear about you. But I think there's a lot that happens in horizontal growth. And in my career, it was less about me. I've not been always thinking about what's the next move for me. I'm not motivated by that. I'm motivated, connected to influence and legacy and impact. Those things are highly motivating for me. But it's important to see people in different roles. And I'm showing up with my notepad everywhere.
Yeah.
It's here right now.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. If people are always like, get digital, I'm like, no, I'm still pulling all this. I got we talk about this all the time. Like, cause I'm like you. I love to write stuff down, and I was like, can she say that one more time, or like whatever it is, because there's so much information like all the time. Like you can learn something in any room, any setting, any conversation if you are just open to listening. And I love that you said that, because I think it's interesting now, like mentors and coaching has become such more of a popular buzz word. Whereas like I've talked to people who, were entering corporate America or starting a business or what have you. And they were like, that whole mentoring coaching, that was not like a formal title. Like it wasn't like you were being coached or you were being mentored, but you didn't know that's what it was. Like you didn't necessarily go into it, because I feel like part of what I think I've experienced as a millennial is like this twofold of just, I didn't really know what mentoring or coaching was when I started kind of in, my workspace. But then I started meeting all these people who were spending time like pouring into me, like you, for example. Like I know we've had like mentoring sessions, not knowing they were mentoring sessions. Like we would go walk on a track because it was just like, listen, like, well, I gotta, and I loved it. It was always like, you want to go walking? I was like, not really, but I will. I wasn't healthy back then.
I was trying
to get my life together.
Walk and talk sessions.
And it would be so good. And I'm like, okay, I worked out and I just learned so many things at the same time. And so now there's this awareness around that, like people do want to help you. And earlier you said something that I really appreciated, because, I think culturally or just wherever you kind of grew up, like I grew up in an environment where everything was so from a deficit standpoint. And so you kind of grow up with this guard of like, nobody's going to help you. So you got to help yourself, or you got to go out there and get it, because it's always just like you. And so and
you can't trust either.
You can't trust people. And so then you naturally kind of like, depending on your environment, you kind of grow up with, well, why would somebody help me? Why is this person coaching me? I don't want a mentor. I don't want a therapist, because I don't want people in my business. I don't want to seem weak. I don't want to seem like I don't know what I'm doing. And so then when you start to surround yourself with people who are not like that, or understanding that there is this world of support. And I love that one of your predecessor was actually a man. And so like I remember we've had conversations, because oftentimes we feel like we have to find somebody that's just like us. And I know I've received mentoring and coaching from people I would have never expected to receive that from. So I feel like in your experience and just having like just it seems like just an organic process of connecting with people, being able to experience genuine support, but then also being a catalyst for that support for other people. How do you feel like as we're seeing the changes in generations, like now as millennials and, the generations of how business is done and how people are just living life differently, like what would you say is like some of the biggest like takeaways as you're seeing like this kind of shift in leadership, shift in how we are, really organizing and creating impact? Like does it look different to you from where you started in the beginning?
Well, I would probably say the past 33 months look different, right? To go back to something that you referenced as you were kind of setting up the stage of the conversation, Christina, is I believe we're hardwired for connection. And, as I think about where we are today and certainly can appreciate technology and the advances that show up, in our society, I think they can be extremely advantageous. I think it also is important for us to kind of pause and recognize that where we're not creating and building spaces for people to connect, and to kind of form those partnerships and relationships. I said it earlier, I think we grow in community. A lot of times what we're seeing now is that more of the orientation, whether we're talking about business, whether we're even talking about personal experiences, about me having this independent experience, isolated and separate and disconnected from community, right? And so, what's true about individual, whether we're talking about leaders, and by the way, I should pause and recognize that when I reference kind of the word leadership in my experience with the organization, is I think everybody has the capacity to lead, and everybody usually is leading something. So by definition, leadership is part of all of our identities, however that shows up in your world.
Right.
But if you're a parent and have kids, there are a lot of leadership skills that you have to have in place in order to kind of operate in those different spaces. But I do think that the world is changing and shifting. I think there's a lot of optimism in what these technology advances can do for our community, and in response to some of the needs that we're seeing, especially from a business sense. But I do think it's always important for us to anchor back to we need each other.
Yeah.
We need each other. I mean, I think thematically, the theme that we heard from the beginning of this pandemic that started in 2020 was we need. How are you going to survive this circumstance? You need to connect, and relationships, I think, are still king. We ascribe to that in our work. We recognize we need a whole ecosystem of support.
Right.
But the foundation of that is relationships. And so definitely a supporter of trying to figure out how do we create more spaces for young people, especially. I mean, obviously, both of you are very connected to, I think, some youth challenges that emerge, and we want to be aware and talk about youth challenges. But you said something earlier that I wanted to circle back to. And it's, I appreciate that when we have a conversation about young people, that we're not exclusively focusing on deficit,
Right.
and that we're very intentional about having an asset-based discussion about, yes, our kids and many kids that we interact with come from lived experiences like ours that include poverty, that include traumatic experiences, all of these potential things that could be part of their lived experience. In my circumstance, it was a parent who was incarcerated. And you can equally hold a gift that you have to foster and develop, and that in the future you can be the CEO of an organization, right? That those two truths can exist in one space for a young person, for a person wherever stage of life that they're in, right? Because I don't think that, I know a lot of times we can think about, well, if I didn't complete this at this time in my life, I've kind of missed the mark, but that there's always an opportunity to kind of come back to growth in different spaces.
Absolutely.
We were just talking about that, I think, in one of our episodes, about how some people think it's too late, right? And how do we help people understand that it's never too late, almost never too late to make changes. So for you, you've been there for 20 years. You say, I'm not thinking about the next step. But I know personally in your growth in this company, you have thought about some personal things that you have kind of branch it out because you feel like that's important, right? So we talk about coaching. Coaching is very important to you, and you've done some journeys. So could you share with us a little bit about?
And she's so natural at it. Like, I think Elizabeth is being like, I mean,
she's very modest.
Some people, I now everybody wants to be a coach, right? Which respectfully, I get it. But there's just some people naturally who I really feel like that's part of God's gift. And there's a discernment that I feel like comes along with coaching. And you are just naturally, I think you have, you're very much connected in that space. You were mentioning earlier your spirituality being rooted in that. And I feel like you have always just had like this discernment about you where you can feel out a room, a person. And I think you naturally lead and coach. It makes sense to me that you would fall into more of a development space because that's just naturally who you are. And so as Maylin was, I guess, asking that question, it's just, is that something that you feel like you eventually want to do more of? Or is it more of just if the opportunity presents itself, you might lean into that? So what is that like that season of your journey look like?
Well, first of all, thank you. Y'all are super sweet. All of your kind words are just so appreciated. I would say, so I'm a certified executive coach, and part of the motivation for that, I think you're spot on, Christine. I think I naturally have always gravitated to growth, some passion connected to being a growth advocate, whatever space I'm in. And I don't know that necessarily had just transpired when in my career with Big Brothers Big Sisters. I have probably memories, and if my siblings were on this podcast, they might have some stories, but I'm the natural mediator, communicator. There's a lot of different roles that I play in my family
Are
dynamics.
You the oldest?
No,
Which one are
I'm
you?
one of four.
Okay.
So I have an older sister and brother. But kind of naturally, you have some spaces where you can exercise some of those tools that you have in your toolkit, and sometimes you don't even know you have in your toolkit. But I think part of this is anchored to what I talked about earlier. I think because I am a student, and because when I go back and look at now kind of my trajectory, my learning journey, is I can point out at very important points in my life where other people played a role in my growth, right? And so whether I was incredibly fortunate and gifted to walk into a space that someone had already been assigned to be a partner to me in that space, or whether I was intentional about seeking out other people. But the most important thing for me is I don't know where this next thing would be for me in my career. I'm always thinking about who I want to be when I grow up. And so I think part of that will always be anchored to development. And in many ways that is the mentoring work. So I don't think, the work that I do now, that there's a stop and start. I think you have the ability kind of in the future to grow into different spaces where you can do more of that. There's nothing more rewarding in my career right now. And you get to do a whole lot of different things. There's a range of things that you are engaged in when you're assuming a responsibility like the one I feel like I have the privilege to do now. But there's nothing more rewarding than seeing someone who's hungry and you being able to kind of show up and be a partner on their growth journey. And so I think that's really powerful because usually out of gratitude, as you suggested earlier, I already know that person will then turn around and do that for somebody else. And so when you really think about this as not just a job or a role or a title or certification, but you're thinking about how can I affect change in community, right? Whether it's in my scope of work right now or thinking about kind of long-term that hopefully all of us, right? Whether certification or not, whatever you're doing in the growth development space, people should feel better as a result of interacting with you. I should be better, as a result of this interaction. And if we did more of that, I think we'd probably be in a different space. So I don't know that I answered your question.
No,
I don't have a goal, Maylin, of kind of what to do next, but I'm open,
Yeah. And I love that and I think it's important that even as, whatever you're leading, if you're leading a corporation, your household, just yourself. I mean, that's a lot
just
of work.
leading yourself is a lot of work, guys.
That's a full-time job right there. Can we talk? Should we talk about leading yourself?
Every day I'm like, who you want to be today? Because I look like a loca the other day. I went to the store.
You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that.
She's always yelling at me because she's like, like this was years ago, guys. I've really gotten my life so much more because I used to roll out the house. Like I'm the type of girl. So like, like the Tina in me was always like sweatpants, Timberlands, a bun. Like that's just, but I always felt like that girl, like even in that outfit. And Maylin used to always yell at me. She's like, you can't walk around like that. Like we're a brand now and you gotta be. And so to your point, it's just like this constant, like,
so they get pictures of us and one day got proven. And then from there,
like some paparazzi in a bush somewhere, like they're going to get a picture of us. And I'm like,
but they did.
They did one time. And she was so spot on.
We were on the front cover of a magazine.
Yeah, I looked a hot mess. I didn't put any makeup on. You looked beautiful, of course. I didn't look as great. But I say all that to say it's just this, it is this constant, because I do believe before you can serve others and lead in spaces that you have to put that energy and time into yourself.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, like, I always hear people like, you got to give, but you also can't give what you don't have. And I think that's something I would love to kind of get your perspective on, Elizabeth, because, in leadership, it becomes heavy because you are carrying the weight of so many other things. And even as an executive coach, I feel like that's another layer of something you're carrying because people will dump so much on you, even if it's unintentionally. And so then like, how do you get to a point of like, how are you intentionally replenishing yourself? Like, what does that self-care look like for Elizabeth so that, if you are in this space of leading an organization or if you're coaching someone or if you're just being a mom that day or a sister, like how does it look for you to be able to replenish yourself to be the person that you are very intentional about being for others?
Yeah. Well, I'm smiling over here because I know that I have to show up in all spaces being authentic. I probably have some friends of mine that are fact checkers on the podcast here. So what I will say is I've not always been good at that. But I think, as I continue to kind of evolve as professionally and personally, I think I'm creating more spaces to be intentional around that. And by the statement of not being good at it, I mean that in terms of the self-care. Now, in the self-workspace, I have spent a lot of time. I talked about some of the experiences that I had growing up as a child were traumatic. And I think what's really important and powerful to understand about that journey is that there are, behaviors that you've adopted, there are coping mechanisms that you needed in certain stages of your life that you have to understand when you need to retire those and you need to engage with new skills into new phases of your life. And I spend most of the time, some reflection time at the end of the year, trying to identify and kind of discover where those are. I'm a seeker. And so I don't want those things to just happen and manifest. I'm going to look for them. And where is that? I'm paying attention to it. I'm listening to it. Whatever those experiences are, because I understand that, as Brene Brown would say, what gets in the way becomes the way.
Right.
And so I want to make sure that there are obviously phases and seasons of your life, and this is not about the thing, this is about the journey. But we can delay seasons in our journey if we're not thoughtful about that excavation with the purpose of restoration. Right. So that's really, really important. And I have been diligent on that. I think what I'm finding now, especially when you're in the space that I am, is that pause time is so incredibly important. I've been thinking a lot in this season about grind culture and, how important it is to think about how do we dismantle the understanding that, everything has to be a hustle and everything has to be a grind when we are our most creative selves is when we are in spaces of silent and quiet. And
Facts.
I need to get outside. All you need to give this Caribbean girl is some beach time, get
Listen,
my
an
toes in the
ocean.
sand.
Cuba Libre.
That is my happy space.
Right.
So low
Yeah.
maintenance. I don't need to do a lot.
Yeah.
But and beyond just those
Yeah.
experiences, what does the daily practice of that grounding look like?
Mm-hmm.
And so in this season of my life, that's where I spend my time.
Mm-hmm.
And back to the mentoring conversation we were having, not leaving that to chance. Because if I don't fill my cup in the morning before I leave my house,
Mm-hmm.
my schedule takes over for the day, and I'll look up and it's evening and it's time to go home, right? And so I have a daily practice where I start and I listen to a podcast or a sermon, and sometimes I listen to your podcast, right? So you're on that rotation, but just if you whatever you feed, whatever you feeding on, whatever you're surrounding yourself with is going to come out. Right. And so what does that look like in an ongoing practice to do that? And I've just been, there've been times in my life where I haven't been very diligent about that. And now I just don't compromise on it because I recognize the importance and the value in that. And then obviously, as I mentioned, faith as well, like to operate in these spaces and in these levels is exhausting.
Yeah.
And I think we start with the conversation that we're not robots either. Like this, this title didn't come with a chip.
Yeah, right.
We're not
So
robots. I'm still a whole human.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
that's important to kind of normalize that experience. And, I stay away from conversations where people want to introduce me as a fearless leader, because I think that removes other people from the ability to consider themselves in spaces like these, right? I don't think there's anybody who's completely fearless, right?
Yeah.
You kind of learn to navigate and through different circumstances and understand that you can overcome that. And yeah. But anyway, I think that appreciate the question. I that taking care of me and the business of me is important.
Absolutely.
Kind of like leading yourself, what you were going to get into a couple of seconds ago, right? It takes a lot to lead ourselves when you're trying to lead others and manage your own self.
Yeah.
Now you have that practice, and I'm glad you guys, that was one of my questions. In the morning, is that like a 30-minute? Is that a 10-minute? Does it vary, your daily practice to feel into yourself?
Yeah, it varies. And I don't try to always carve it out separately, right? Obviously, if there's going to be, still or prayer time, I have to find time for that. But the most important thing is, as I'm getting ready in the morning, as I'm thinking about my day, that's always playing in the background, and making sure that I have the opportunity to kind of take that information in. And it's fascinating because sometimes you'll hear something that you didn't even know you needed until later in the day. I'm also a believer of kind of going back to learn again because Christina, I mentioned earlier, I like to take notes. So if I'm just listening to it in the background, a lot of times I'll flag it to kind of go back. And then get my nuggets on paper.
Yeah. TD Jake said something one time. He was like, don't share this yet. Get the information first and then go back and share it with your friends. And I was like, how do you know? I will listen halfway through a podcast and I'm already like hitting share. And I'm like, you haven't finished the whole episode.
But the first 5 minutes were so good. Like, they were good.
He was like, stop. He was like, just listen. Just listen to me first. And I was like, wow. He
has eyes
he really
like her
listening.
parents.
Because it's true. It's hard sometimes because you are such a steward. And I think many of us are stewards in that way. And then it's like, no, just take a moment, be present, listen, just experience the information before you go on to share it. So I love that you said that. And as we are wrapping up this particular episode, I definitely would love to have you back because I feel like this really only scratched the surface of so many things that I feel like you would be able to give just a really great viewpoint and lens on. But you said something earlier in your introduction that I really want to be able just to hone in on a little bit more because I thought it was so spot on and many people don't think about the legacy of their work. And, you you said something to the effect of like you wanted to give us like in real time flowers, and it kind of made me think about oftentimes you don't really see a person's impact in life until you read it. Like, and I hate to say it because it's kind of morbid, but like obituaries, and then when someone passes away, you find out all these things.
Everybody has something great to say.
Everyone has so much to say. And I used to think, when I used to think legacy, I used to think of the legacy of a person's life after they've gone. But there's power in knowing what your legacy is while you're still here to experience it and breathe it. And so when you said something about, focusing on your legacy, what is Elizabeth's legacy? Like what in looking at everything you've done and kind of just this, I would say it's almost multidimensional at this point. If you could sum up what your legacy has been, or what you hope your legacy has been up until this point, what would that be?
Yeah. The way that I think about it, Christina, is I kind of have to give a visual to get to respond to that question. I've always been fascinated by trees. And I don't know when the fascination was birthed. I feel like as an adult now, I find myself trying to find spaces where I can see like unique tree formations. I'm not as sophisticated as an arborist to like know what I'm even looking for. It's more just kind of the appreciation, not only of the beauty of creation, but also understanding kind of the secret language of roots. And how important it is to understand that in a root system, one tree can identify when there's a deficiency in another tree and can serve as within proximity as a temporary resource. I first think about legacy in my family before I think about anything that I am externally. So, my son kind of plays a really critical role in that. So when I think about my legacy, you can ask my nieces and nephews right now, but if they have any interaction with their titi when I'm in spaces together with them, they know we're either reading or learning, we're unpacking, we are having conversations about how their head and heart is doing. So we have a code that we use to kind of identify, how's your head and how's your heart, so that we can have a conversation about, how you're feeling, to be able to give them kind of a vocabulary and an outlet to be able to talk about their own experiences. So I think what I hope my legacy is, you don't know until you're no longer here. But I want it to be of one that people understand that we are all part of that root system, right? We have to source each other. We should be growing. And if you really love and care about someone, then you want to be a partner on that journey. And I not that I hope, I know, and I'm seeing that especially those in my family network, there are a lot of times where you will hear your words in other spaces.
Right.
And you're really grateful about that. It's funny to see my son as an adult, because sometimes we'll have conversations and I'm like, I texted him the other day and I was like, "You are my child." He was like, "Did you think I needed you to confirm that?" Or
He's like, "I'm pretty sure, yes."
But it's just beautiful to kind of see that, as I'm learning, and it's not because I've mastered any of this, but as I'm learning it and deeply learning, back to TD Jake's comment, right? As I'm deeply learning and like, I want to share, I want others to kind of experience that so we can keep learning together. But that they, always feel comfortable about talking about their humanity, how they're experiencing the world, and that they have the tools to do that. And, if I can do that with this generation within my family, I also understand that generations to come will be impacted by that. And then, obviously then, whatever you do here translates into the professional space as well, right? I hope that when I walk out of a space, that people are like, wow, I felt seen. Somebody saw me.
Yeah.
I didn't have to be like, oh, all these nuggets I felt seen. I felt heard. Elizabeth gave me a podcast, a book that she was listening to. Something is going to happen in that interaction that will be evidence that, as Beyonce would say, I was here.
Yeah.
I was here.
I love that song. Oh my God, we love every time I'm like, I got to do more, but okay.
I was here.
Yes.
I was here.
Oh, I love that. And we appreciate you being here today. I think this was a very fruitful conversation, and just to be able to experience you in this capacity, I think it's a blessing for us. It'll be a blessing for our listeners.
A treat.
Absolutely. So we thank you for coming. We definitely want to have you back because I feel like there's so many.
I have so many more questions.
I know, but we'll separate that for like maybe early summer. We'll be at the new building then, and maybe we can. I don't know. We can have like something.
Some refreshments. It would be a really cool podcast.
We could probably even bring like another person. Like we could have like a just
that would be fun. Let's build our own
dialogue.
little community. Our little root system.
Yes, our root system.
I love that you share that.
Yes. So as you know, every episode of True Print for Life, we always want to close out each episode with intention and, being able to link it back to our personal mantra.
It's
bigger than you.
Thank you so much for listening today. We're excited and we hope that you follow us on
Instagram, True Print for Life, YouTube channel, also True Print for Life. And make sure that you share, like, watch our videos. Make sure that you follow us on all streaming platforms.